Yeah, it's called Conversations with Jeff, not Screaming Matches.
Yeah, you and I do not agree on Calvinism. But look how nice we are to each other.
I think it's going to really shock a lot of people, thrill a lot of people. A lot of people are going to have to do some soul searching.
It's like, you know what? What are you doing? You're spending all your time trying to destroy another Christian day because you don't understand what's going on, when you should be out there winning people for Jesus.
Right.
Thank you for the job you're doing. Thanks for being willing to address these kind of issues. They're vital to the church.
I feel sorry for what's coming your way, but God bless you, man. It's a good, healthy conversation, and let's keep growing together in the Lord.
People won't change unless they hear the truth, though. And so we need to know the truth, speak the truth. And then the last one I would say is that we need to stay in the truth, no matter what the consequences are.
Okay, everybody, welcome to today's episode of Conversations with Jeff. We've been having a string of, episodes, coming out every single day. Yesterday we had on Jerry Wayne, who is famous for his run-in with Vice President Joe Biden, which was a blast talking to him and that sort of thing. And so you guys can check out that episode. That's on Facebook. It'll be posted on YouTube, I believe, tomorrow. So you guys can check that out as well. Before I introduce our guest today, just a reminder as well, we do have our Plugged In program that will give you guys access to our Destroy Social Justice conference exclusively. You guys can stream that as well. The full video for that will be going up behind or within that membership, probably either later today or tomorrow. And then you'll also get exclusive discounts in our store. We're going to be adding more books, more resources, and that sort of thing to our GK store for you guys as well. But then also, too, if you guys do sign up for the annual membership, I'm going to be sending you guys a copy of Social Injustice for free. So if you guys sign up for the annual membership where you pay for the year up front, I will send you a copy of the book right out in the mail pretty much the same day, if not the next day after you sign up. So make sure you guys do that. Check that out. Go to gatekeepersonline.com/plugged-in, and you guys can get more information on that. Really excited to be bringing on our guest today. We've got Pastor Sam Jones. I think this is technically your fourth time on Conversations with Jeff, so glad to have you back.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here. And just trying to stay ahead of Andy Woods to be your guest that comes on here most. So.
Yeah, I think technically you're tied for the lead of being a guest on the show. With I think this is your third time now, but technically you're in the lead because you did host it one time. Yeah,
that was an interesting one. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
So
well, I'm glad we could sit down and talk and that sort of thing. Especially with all the craziness that's going on out in the world. I mean, I'm sitting over here in California where literally it's like the apocalypse has happened. All of the grocery stores are completely empty. No toilet paper to be found anywhere in the county. Like we're having to like order a week in advance from somewhere in like the Midwest, whatever it is, where maybe they have something, and we're sitting over
from
here
from China,
like,
right?
Well, yeah, I mean, there is that too. So, but yeah, it's this whole thing right now. I just feel like it's crazy.
Yeah, no, it's definitely crazy. It's crazy everywhere. We're in the middle of Iowa, okay, and Iowa, we've got a bunch of cornfields. There's not a whole lot going on. Our capita is way down compared to California or New York or something like that. But I mean, we've had a state of emergency declared by our governor, by our county board of supervisors, and by our mayor even. You can't go play soccer out on the soccer fields right now without facing a misdemeanor. Now, granted, I don't want to speak too crazy here. I'm pretty sure that the cops in Hudson, Iowa would just go and tell the kids, hey, go home. I don't think they would arrest them and put them in jail. I'm a huge fan of our police force. Always thank them whenever they get the opportunity. But I mean, things are crazy right now. If now was a time that Jesus Christ needed to be lifted up, it definitely is now.
Yeah, and I think that, with all the craziness going on right now, I think that this is a really good opportunity for Christians to be, again, light shining in darkness, because I feel like the rest of the world is going insane. It's going crazy. It's like literally the end of the world because of coronavirus. And then it's, to a certain degree, a lot of Christians are responding in the same way. A lot of panic, a lot of, overreaction and that sort of thing. But, from you as like a pastor's standpoint, how should Christians be responding to this madness and craziness?
Right. So the first thing I would say, and this is something that I preached for years, I've used this illustration for years, and, God's word was the same yesterday, today, and forever. It doesn't change. And so these principles are the same. So what we were preaching yesterday, we should be preaching today. Hot water, when it comes to tea, I'm a huge tea fan. If you put a tea bag into hot water, it doesn't change what's in the tea bag. It reveals what's in the tea bag. Difficult circumstances don't change what's in the heart of men. It only reveals what's in our heart. And for some people, that's going to be perceived as a very harsh statement, as they've panicked and they've done these things. But the reality of it is that it's true. If we go and we look at Job, Job, when his life fell apart, and by the way, he went through much more of a state of emergency than what any of us are going through when it comes to coronavirus right now. That's the reality of it. He had an incredible amount of trials come into his life, and he responded by worshiping God. Now, why did he respond by worshiping God? Well, if you go to the very first part of the chapter, it says that regularly he went and made sacrifices, not just for himself, but for his children. Job's default position was to worship God. And so when the water got hot, when the circumstances got difficult and his heart was revealed, he went to his default and worshiped God. People right now are going to their default. So, first of all, let me explain, I guess, why people are acting the way that they are. They're going to their default. And if their default is panic and worry and all these kind of things, then that's what it is. If it's worshiping God, if it's trusting in God, then they're going to go into worship God. They're going to be going and trusting God. Now, with that being said, how should a Christian respond? Well, a Christian should respond with appropriate concern and caution. Just to be perfectly honest here, for the last month, we've been taking more vitamin C. We, for the last month, kind of seeing that these things were coming along and warning people, hey, look at what's happening in China, look at what's happening in these other places. If this gets here, it could happen. We have been stocking up on groceries. We don't have enough to last for a year, so don't come and ransack our house. You'll be a little bit disappointed. But when everything kind of shut down and people got really afraid, we weren't out there buying all this stuff because we had already been preparing. Now it's maybe too late to get ahead of the curve, but the response still needs to be the same, and that is trusting in God, still taking appropriate precautions, and understanding that obedience to God is still first, is still key. But don't lick doorknobs. Don't be silly out there. Actually, practice cleanliness, wash your hands, things like that. But travel less. That's a good thing. But it should be a spirit of that God has given us is a spirit of a sober mind, not one of fear and panic.
Yeah, and I feel like historically with when tragedies happen in America or there's been circumstances like this, I feel like it's always an opportunity for us to show, like you were saying, our default, but show we have faith and trust in God because God is in control. And I think that that's something that when we start freaking out, we start panicking, we start overreacting to things, whether or not this is what's actually going on in our heart or not, but what we're doing is we're telling the world we're not trusting in God right now. And I think that needs to be a reminder, and this is kind of like gut check time of, do we as believers actually trust in God? And I feel like that's something that I think we're actually being put to the test right now.
Absolutely. This is definitely what's getting put to the test. Do we trust in God? And by the way, trusting in God isn't saying I have a doctrinal statement that simply says I trust in God, because this has been the misconception here. We've got a lot of orthodox heteropraxy, which is this idea of people who have wonderful doctrinal statements that I agree with. People will preach sermons that I sit there and I go, I amen this heartily. But then when it comes to actions, it's this wild response that is like taking their doctrinal statement, ripping it up, and throwing it away. And you're going, no, we act in accordance with that. I mean, one big thing that everybody's saying is this is unprecedented times. So we don't know what to do. We don't know what we should be doing. But let me just read a portion of scripture that talks about unprecedented times. I mean, just because it's unprecedented, first of all, doesn't mean that God was surprised. And second of all, doesn't mean that God's word doesn't have an answer for unprecedented times. In the book of Joel, it says, the word of the Lord came to Joel, the son of Pethuel. I'm reading from chapter 1, going to read verses 1 through 3, and then skip down to verse 14. But it says, hear this, you elders, and give ear, all of you inhabitants of the land. Has anything like this happened in your days, or even in the days of your fathers? Tell your children about it. Let your children tell their children, and their children another generation. And then it talks about what happens. This is the locusts, the different swarms of locusts that come through. And it's a phenomena that people couldn't have prevented or stopped. And it's something that is basically like, whoa, what's going on? We've never seen anything like this. That's what's happening with the coronavirus today. And then in verse 14, it says, consecrate a fast, call a sacred assembly, gather the elders and all the inhabitants of the land into the house of the Lord your God, and cry out to the Lord. God has given us a response that we should have. We should be going to God. We should be resting to God. We should be going and praying to God. And I mean, it even said that dangerous word in there, assembly.
Yeah, and which then I think leads into a main, kind of conundrum that a lot of the church is facing today of, we have a lot of local governments that are, cracking down on gatherings. And for example, we saw, Ken Peters with the Church of Planned Parenthood, they were dealing with, they always meet outside of Planned Parenthood up there in Spokane. And they weren't allowed to have a group larger than 50 people. So they're like, basically, 50 people can come and we'll worship together outside of Planned Parenthood, but then everybody else, you need to stay home and stream. And so people are trying to find these ways around all these rules and laws and that sort of thing. But I feel like depending on where you are in the country, I mean, they're really cracking down even on churches gathering.
Yeah. One thing that's just really interesting about this is I was supposed to be there at the Church of Planned Parenthood. I wasn't, not speaking or anything like that, but I was planning on going and being with Pastor Ken out there after the sound ordinance that came out. And I mean, talk about almost buying a plane ticket 3 or 4 times. The worry came, in a biblical worry, or maybe I should say concern is a better word, was I didn't know if I'd be able to get home. And I'm going, I need, especially if we're going to be declaring a state of emergency, I need to be there for the flock of people and for the community. And so I will, Pastor Ken watches this, I'm going to join you. But yeah, now, one thing in kind of looking at what all you said there, first of all, we need to understand it's understandable for churches to cancel. I get that, when roads get icy, we cancel. But one thing that's happening that's different here, and it may depend on state to state because it's not different, or because it's not a federal thing. Sorry, my phone is blowing up right now, and I'm using my phone, and all these messages are coming in. Is that the government is mandating that people don't meet. In the state of Iowa, which, by the way, Republican governor, House of Representatives, and state Senate. I mean, we are red state, okay? And unfortunately, I think that red might start meaning communism instead of Republican here. We're going to have to find out. But we're under a mandate to not meet out in Washington, much more liberal state, much denser population than Iowa. They've got 50 people because they're following the CDC guidelines. Our governor came out and said 10, and it came out and included religious organizations. Because of technical difficulties here, we're streaming from my phone, and otherwise I'd go and actually read it to you, but I don't have the ability right now to go and to read exactly what the mandate is in the wording, but it includes churches. Now, when this came out, me and some other pastors were going, well, surely this was a mistake by the governor. Okay, the governor, just an oversight in the panic and everything. This must be what it is. So we call up the governor's office and, get answering machines and other people. And that's understandable. Governor's hard to reach right now. But the response was later that night, I'm doing dishes, get a notification on my phone. It says, clarification was made on the declaration of emergency. And so, oh, good. She got the message. Perfect. And it goes and it says, peace officers have the mandate to go and to arrest people if they break this. We're like, are you kidding me? Because, let's look at the First Amendment, okay? The Constitution's First Amendment, not very long here. It says this: Congress shall make no law. And if Patrick Wyatt were with me here, Patrick No Compromise, Wyatt, he'd say, let's stop right there. Why does it say Congress shall make no law? Because only Congress has the power to make law in this land. So first of all, it's not a law what these governors are saying. It's not a law even what the president's saying. They can't make law. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. We have the right to peaceably assemble. And by the way, all Christians should believe, well, everybody technically believes rights come from God. Whoever the real authority is, they're the ones who give rights. And so God, because that's the highest authority, I believe, is the one who gives rights. This right to assemble isn't from the government. It's recognized by the government. So from a legal perspective, this is absolutely an egregious overreach and step, and it's not consistent either, which is a major issue. Yes, as I've been reminded several times by other pastors, nightclubs and bars are also closed. I guess, I'm, as a pastor, wild thinking here, I believe that the church is intrinsically more valuable and infinitely more valuable than a nightclub or a bar. But also, I just got a message that might be saying that the governor's changing it. I'm not sure, or tripling down. We'll find out. But we'll check that later. But also, you look at this here, there are places of employment that are open today. For example, Walmart. Okay, a Walmart cart is much dirtier, and you have an infinite more times chance of getting coronavirus from a Walmart cart than you do the pews in our church. We have people who are working in factories with hundreds of people right now, rubbing shoulders and elbows with them, and yet we can only have 10 people in our church building. It's just a ridiculous mandate, complete overreach from the governor. I hope that thing that I just got was a statement of recanting, but we'll find out afterwards.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'll keep trying to see if I can't pull that up since I'm recording on my computer instead of my phone. But the thing is, with me being out in California, obviously extremely liberal state. Pretty much as liberal as you can pretty much get out here in California. And, where we are is probably one of the most conservative parts of the state. And we have the strictest laws going on right now in the sense of how to deal with coronavirus, where it's literally you can't meet or be with anybody else outside of your immediate household. So we're not even talking like a cap off of 10 people. We're saying you can only be with people that's in your immediate household, but then there's exceptions for what they call quote unquote necessary businesses, right? So that would be things like grocery stores. But then they start listing all the quote unquote necessary businesses. That includes a hardware store. It also includes places like Target and Walmart because you can buy household items. Like you start going down the list and you're like, okay, so a hardware store is necessary, but a church is not necessary. So why not say you could go to church but practice that, let's say like the safe distance, right? So I think they're saying it's like 6 feet. You're not allowed, like legally in where we are, you're not allowed to be within 6 feet of somebody else. And if you are, you could get arrested.
So, by the way, Jeff, I'm really glad you brought this up because this is where the rubber really meets the road here on this one. Okay, the safe distance 6 feet. There is a reasonable way to interpret this. Okay, and the reasonable way to interpret this is that God's laws are over man's laws. So, basically, what it's saying is, hey, don't be stupid. Is the 6 feet mandate? Don't be stupid and shake somebody's hand right now. Don't go and give them a hug out in public. But Jeff, you should give your wife a hug. And maybe even a kiss too. And that's the thing here. All these people, like, are they staying 6 feet away from each other? You see all the jokes of, I'm predicting a boom of babies in 9 months. Well, not if people are practicing the 6 feet rule. And it's absolutely, and I don't mean this, I'm not saying this to be crude. I'm saying this to go, look, part of God's law is a man and a wife should be together. They should be one flesh. And going and looking at it this way, the government's has no right to go and to intervene there and say, nope, we're separating this and not allowing you guys to be close to one another. And yet, then, and of course, every pastor in the United States, I guarantee it, every pastor and every Christian would sit there and say, yes, you're right. It's not talking about a 6 feet distance from somebody in your own household, and not saying that husband and wife can't give each other a hug. That's not what it's saying. And I go, okay, then we're on the same page with this. And that's why we should still allow churches to meet too, because it is something that God has said for us to do. Now, if the churches autonomously decide to cancel, whether I agree or disagree with their decision, I agree that they have the right to do it, but government has no right to tell a church what to do.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, like, I was talking with a friend of ours over the weekend, and they were talking about how, I forget what decade it was in, probably maybe in the 60s, right? There was a power outage in New York, and there was a big baby boom 9 months later, right? Well, now we're having that with the coronavirus, but they're supposedly calling it the coronials. So instead of millennials, it's going to be the coronials. So that's going to be the next generation.
I'm glad I'm in the millennials now, because that's a terrible name.
I know. I couldn't imagine. So, but I think that it's an important thing that we need to understand is that I feel like what's happened over the last decade or two is that, maybe even longer, but the government has been setting itself up as essentially God, right? They are basically, they're saying we're the ones that give you rights, thus we can be the ones that take them away. And I feel like we as Christians, we need to be making it clear in both publicly and within our congregations and that sort of thing, is that our first response is to God. Because we understand that God is the one that gives us the rights, like you were saying before. And so while the government may be putting down these laws, but at the same time, they're taking away our rights with all of this. And so at a certain point, how do we respond as Christians where it's like the government is stepping in and saying, okay, we're going to take away your right to peaceably assemble, when they're not the ones that gave us the right in the first place?
Right. So I think the proper response is whether you're meeting or not. And this is key, because everybody is kind of taking what I'm saying on my social media. If you go and look out there, you'll see some interesting things that people have told me. But whether the church is deciding to assemble or not to assemble, your church and your pastor should speak out against these mandates. And this is why I say this. Let's take this and let's throw away all political assumptions here in everything, because everybody likes to say, let's separate the sacred from the secular. You know, I'm not a pietist. I've spoken quite a bit about pietism being wrong, and also I preached often on civil obedience and disobedience. Look, I don't have any speeding tickets on my record. I drive like a grandma. People get mad at me for how I drive. I'm not this flaming rebel who wants to come out here and say, I'm just shaking my fist to shake my fist. I'm somebody who actually wants to obey, but my first authority is God. That's the thing. And that's the proper interpretation. The historic interpretation of Romans 13 is that we're to obey a legitimate minister of God called the civil government when they're legitimately administering God's rule, not when they are doing their own thing. And so I think the proper response here is whether the churches are closing or whether they're staying open, they should be calling their representatives, their governors, whatever it is, maybe writing letters or sending emails saying, we disagree with your edict. We disagree with this. And this is why it's so important. Pastors are sitting here saying it's just temporary. That's one of the biggest things I hear.
I think we're losing you there, Sam, for a sec. The screen froze. Hey everybody, we are back with conversations. We had some technical difficulties. Internet cut out. I mean, is it coronavirus? I don't know. We'll see. So we're back here with Pastor Sam, and we've been talking about the biblical response to the coronavirus and how churches should be dealing with things, and especially with a lot of this government overreach in response to the coronavirus. Sam, we are back, and I know that you were like right in the middle of talking about everything, and then the internet cut out, which made it really fun.
Yeah. So I don't know if I'll be able to pick up exactly right where I was in the exact word, but I know the thought, so we'll go with that.
Sure.
The one big pushback here towards churches has been that the government is just doing this for a temporary amount of time. It's just a short amount of time. But one thing I do want to remind everyone is that length of time doesn't equate to something being sinful or not. And once again, not to be crude, but I'll give this illustration to make a point. It doesn't take that long, that much amount of time to commit adultery or fornication, and yet it's still sinful. So the amount of time that the government is doing this does not make the principle okay, and it doesn't change the principle. It's either right or it's wrong. It's not according to situation. It's either something that's right or it's something that's wrong. But also when it comes to this coronavirus and the government overreach, it's not just an overreach of political liberty. It's also an overreach in a doctrinal standpoint. Now, I'm a Baptist pastor, and so our church is one of the Baptist distinctives is being autonomous. And Baptist churches are to be autonomous. Now, there are other ideas of this too, but it still actually applies, even if you're an Episcopal type church government that's not autonomous and it has different leaders ahead, whether it's a cardinal and a pope like in the Catholic Church or whatever it might be. The idea of autonomy itself, though, is that somebody outside of the church can't tell the church what to do. And that's an actual doctrine that we hold to. I've heard all kinds of pastors preach on this years ago, and then when a governor comes in and says you're shutting down your church, it's they lose all autonomy. Maybe that's an overreaction saying losing all autonomy, but they lose autonomy in this situation. And our doctrines aren't situational. They're doctrines, they're teachings, they're right, they're there. Even if you're in an Episcopal type church government, though, it's still that line that you have, whether it's Pope, Cardinal, and I'm not really sure on all of the line, but it's still the idea that it has to go through that line, not somebody from outside the line, and that's what's happening here. Of course, then you have the biblical side of separation of church and state, which is also another Baptist distinctive, which has been commandeered by the left, that the church should stay out of the state's business. But the original principle, the one that was talked about in the letter from Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptists, was that the state would stay out of the church's business. Well, I can't think of anything more of getting in the church's business than the state telling the church you have to shut down. I mean, that's you can't gather. That's getting in the church's business. And one thing I think we need to remember is that if the government is comfortable telling the church when they can meet, pretty soon they're going to be very comfortable telling the church what they can say. And many people are talking about the alternative of going to live stream. Even when coronavirus isn't out there, we generally live stream on Facebook. So we're not afraid of technology. We're not technophobes here. But who's to say that they're not going to censor this? If you can't meet and then they censor you, the preaching of the word's not getting out.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a big deal.
Yeah. Well, see, and that was one of the problems that the Church of Planned Parenthood faced with their service that they had the other night, was that they were told you're not allowed to have more than 50 people show up. So they had, I'm assuming they probably had smack dab right on 50 people, because I'm sure, knowing Ken Peters, he's going to take advantage of every single thing he can do. And then they live streamed it. So then people stayed at home. He said that they had like 21,000 people that were watching on the live stream, and then Facebook catches wind of it and shuts down the live stream. So now you're starting to get into this whole censorship side of things, where even though it's not the government censoring, it's big tech. But at the same time, big tech is kind of an arm of the government in enforcing a lot of those rules. So now it's like, now what do churches do if Facebook is going to start shutting down live streams?
Right. And the other thing too about this, I think is necessary to realize. So in Iowa, and this is the one I'm going to speak to because this is the one I know. In Iowa, the state of emergency was put out, and for 2 weeks till the end of the month, I can't remember if March has 30 or 31 days. I think it's 31. We can't meet with 10 or only 10 or less people. By the way, not 50, 10 or less people. But the thing is that the state of emergency itself was actually issued for a month, for 4 weeks. And so it actually goes through April, I think it was 16th, is when that is, maybe it's 17th. And then on top of that, the CDC's recommendation for the restriction on meeting was actually 8 weeks. And so when we're talking about this and people are talking about temporary, it's minimally, for anybody who's trying to use wisdom and everybody trying to say, be as wise as a serpent, as innocent as a dove, be as wise as a serpent, as innocent as a dove. Well, be as wise as a serpent, as innocent as a dove. It's not going to be for 2 weeks. We're talking 4 weeks minimum in Iowa, more likely 8 weeks. And really, in reality, my assumption is that it's going to be 8 to 12 weeks. So now you're talking about 1/6 of a year, or even a quarter of a year. Are we okay with losing a quarter of our church services, losing a quarter of our assembling times together? It's not as temporary as what people think it is. And by the way, during that time, this is a huge pet peeve of mine. Easter, we're going to celebrate that Jesus, our Savior, defeated death by being afraid of death? I don't know. I don't know. That sounds crazy to me.
Yeah, it is interesting. Now, I feel like, it's like, okay, so you got Easter coming up, right? So maybe what churches could do is get around it on a technicality. Is like, go meet in a big open area, be in groups of 10, at least each group is at least 6 feet apart from the other group, and then you have one person with a megaphone or a sound system that's then projecting to everybody else, and then technically you are congregating in groups of 10, at least 6 feet apart from everybody else. On a technical standpoint, you would be obeying the law.
Right. And I'm really glad you brought that up, Jeff, and I'm not going to give any of the ideas that are going through. But right now, I'm brainstorming with several different pastors as to how we can actually meet the legal qualification for gathering and assembling while still trying to obey the government at the same time as much as we possibly can, so that it can be safe and so that we are still safe against the virus and safe from tyrants. Because one thing that I think we need to kind of pump the brakes a little bit here, even let's go worst case scenario, okay? Absolute worst case scenario, coronavirus is the biggest, baddest germ we've seen for a long time. It sweeps through, the death tolls just start snowballing, and we get millions and millions of people dying, okay? That is an absolute horrific, horrific tragedy. But it does not negate facts. And the fact is that though viruses in their worst case scenario might kill millions, tyrants generally kill tens of millions. And so, all those people who are shouting, love your neighbor, love your neighbor. Yes, love your neighbor, stand up for liberty, stand up for principles. And people might be saying, I think you're overreacting. Jonathan Mayhew, in his sermon on Romans 13, and Jonathan Mayhew, by the way, was a member of the Black Robed Regiment in the 1770s. He was one of the ones who sparked the revolution. And he gives this great discourse on Romans 13, and he presents this idea that liberties are not taken away all at once, but they are slowly eroded away. And we need to realize that. And it was the pastors in 1770s that were the watchmen of our liberty and spurred, and I'm not saying that we need a revolution. That's not what I'm saying. But they're the ones who spurred the preservation and really this great nation. It would be a shame if it was the lack of standing from pastors today that led to the downfall of this nation into tyranny. And once again, I'm not saying that means that churches have to be open, but I'm saying that it's a shame if churches are not standing against these edicts from the governor.
Yeah. Now,
or whoever it is.
Right.
It could be a mayor.
Yeah. Well, see, I feel like it's one of those things where, I think just from a strictly logical perspective, I get both sides of the argument, because obviously we want to keep people safe, right? And I think
100%.
and I think that looking at this issue, one of the things that we're seeing is that like for example, the news came out, and I was telling you this before we went live. I don't think I mentioned it during the actual podcast, but in New York, they announced that there was 7,000 new cases of coronavirus. I believe it was in the state, and one of the things that they were saying, and this isn't that 7,000 new people caught it, it's that they were able to do the testing, and they found 7,000 more people have coronavirus. But one of the things that they were saying is that there's a high percentage of people within the Hasidic Jewish community. And a lot of it is because they were still gathering together and meeting in I'm assuming their synagogue or whatever their gathering place was, and they weren't following the guidelines that were put forth by the CDC and by the local government and that sort of thing. Essentially banning those kinds of gatherings. So then the question is, if we see that the Hasidic Jews are experiencing essentially rampant coronavirus passing from person to person. Obviously, we could see that happening within Christianity and Christian churches. So why is it wrong from that perspective, from a public health safety standpoint, to say, look, we just need to stop gathering in churches for a period of time so we can beat this thing? I think that would be the opposing argument.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. And that is the opposing argument. So I just, while we're on this technology break here, I was looking, and somebody had sent me a study from the UK that actually said that there's minimal to no impact for gatherings with churches. So first of all, I'd say that we can't jump to this idea of correlation equal causation. There is the distinguishing factor there. The other thing I would say is that it's not like people aren't gathering in groups of larger than 10 or even larger than 50. And so I do think we need to have precautions when we meet. And like I said here, really going it through and brainstorming and things like that. I know one pastor I've talked to, they are checking people for fevers on the way in. And I know all the people he's screaming, some people are asymptomatic. I get that. I understand that. And we still let them go to Walmart, okay? I mean, that's the thing. But they're checking people for fevers and going to say, if you're sick, don't come. and they're going to turn people away if they do have fevers and things like that, or showing these symptoms. They regularly practice this anyway in their nursery. They're going to make sure that they have hand sanitizing stations by the door and things like that. So, I mean, there are necessary precautions to take. But one thing I would present on the other side is right now, Walmart has more liberty than a church. Right now, John Deere, a corporation that makes tractors, and they make other things too, but nothing that is essential to our living. If people want to go and say you get your groceries from Walmart, okay, but there's nothing in John Deere that is essential to our living right now, and they're open. And I could go and give, it's not, I'm not just picking on John Deere. That's just the one that's in our backyard. We should not lay down our liberties here. If we're going to go and say, and the government comes out and says, nobody can leave their house. First of all, that's some scary liberty stuff. But if the coronavirus is that bad, we need to have this discussion. Right now, that's not what the government is saying. Right now, the government is saying is that churches are like bars and restaurants.
Okay, sorry for all the technical difficulties on this episode. Earlier we had the power go completely out, and then we had the internet cut out, so we've been having some issues. But just wanted to wrap things up for this episode with Sam Jones. Just a reminder that there's a lot of questions out there in dealing with the coronavirus. There's a lot of questions that a lot of pastors are having to deal with. But the important thing is make sure you guys are staying safe, and make sure you guys are, obviously washing your hands, keeping the proper social distance away from people, that sort of thing. And just, again, stay safe, be smart. And then whatever you decide to do, whatever your local church decides to do, you do what you feel comfortable with. And that sort of thing. So I highly recommend that as well. If you want more information from Sam or anything like that on what he's doing, you guys can follow him on Twitter at SamJone217, or theshininglightministries.com. And then also as well, Sam's got his new book that will be coming out this summer. We're under pre-order right now. It's being published by the GK Publishing. You guys can go to gatekeepersonline.com/store and pre-order that book right now. If you use the code Jeff, you get 10% off of that pre-order. And then also while you're there, you can also get our book, Social Injustice. Again, use the same code Jeff, get 10% off of anything in our store. And then finally as well, just a reminder, we do have our membership program. You're going to get exclusive access to the recording of the Destroy Social Justice Conference. You'll have the recording of both Sam's talk as well as my talk from the Stand Against Marxism Conference. And then we've got our weekly devotional that goes out. You'll get 30% off of anything in our store. There's a lot of perks. If you sign up for the annual membership, you will get a copy of the book Social Injustice absolutely free. So make sure you guys check that out. You can go to gatekeepersonline.com/plugged-in. Again, life is crazy right now. There's a lot going on, but just stay in God's word and keep up on what's going on. Keep up on the news. Keep up on what's going on around you. Stay safe. And then we're coming out with a new podcast pretty much every single day with conversations with Jeff. So make sure you guys are tuning in, subscribe, like, all the good stuff. And then, we will see you guys back here tomorrow. Thanks.